Good afternoon from Brussels. Welcome to the second day of this summit, EuroLat ECR or ECR Eurolat Summit with Europe and Latin America. Today we'll be talking about a very extremely important topic related to the authoritarian regimes and the dictatorships and the value of the trade agreements and the trade agreements signed by the European Union with the different Latin American countries. Do they work? Do they have any aim? The objective of a better life, economic life, and the aim of these governments that are empowering the societies. In a few seconds, we will see a sum up of the state of play in the continent. We're back in this stage. We have Herman Tech with us, president of the EuroLat Political Group, and we have Carlo Fidanza, vice president. We have both Spanish and Italian nationalities here outside the Latin America, and they're very present here. Now that we're witnessing, do you think that we have a direct response, immediate response to the things? Have the things have been done wrongly, rightly? Javier, are you with us? Hello, how are you? Good. Javier Milei is an expert economist in Argentina with a strong political willingness, and he's serious about his job, and if he has to talk about dictatorship, he will do so, and he will showcase the facts as they are. Javier, we will start with you. The first question I have for you is about what are the explanations that you, in your opinion, we have in the region after so traditional economic policies, and during the years those policies were aimed to look forward, and we see that is the contrary. What are the failures to give rise to these movements? So from the left, others indigenous movements, communist movements, but the truth is that they're creating the ruin in these countries. What's your opinion? Well, from my point of view, here we have the economists that are playing a crucial role, and the politicians in the neoclassic system and the logic of servitude that create more demand of intervention. So after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there will be no doubts that the real socialism is a failure. It always fails economically, socially, and they end up assassinating thousands of people. After the fall of the wall of Berlin, we thought everything was over, but then we saw that the socialists had the open doors due to the directors of policies and the good services and the externalities and the failures of coordination and the misinformation. However, what we can see is that all this narrative is a failure and is related to the mathematization of the economy, because whoever understands the economic growth was Adam Smith through the economic performance and the economic growth complemented with the idea of the invisible hand. However, when the neoclassic economy has to make a choice between these two concepts and incorporate the concept as a mathematical concept with the idea of optimization, the other phase is that neoclassic economists, the performance of the economy will not achieve maximums because they're in the limit of their resources. But in addition to all that, we have the problem of the misconception of the mathematics, and the neoclassic mathematics is in the same line as these concepts and these economies and this market structures. And the reality is that we can't stop that. Let's suppose that we have 20 people and we try to compete and we have another company that creates a better product. Obviously, the other 19 will fail, will go to bankruptcy, but that company is not a social beneficiary. So due to a failure on the mathematics structure, we are acquiring other concepts and that will be detrimental to the population and the factors on the market. So these ideas from the neoclassical tradition, something that I'm against is this analysis regarding technology, like the idea of palette. Let's say I have a limit of palettes if I'm not able to find someone better. So we have two things that are similar. In this context then, sorry, just one question. The day that Edison invented the bulb, the manufacturers of candles were very upset. But we use electricity. Well, that's the explanation that you're giving us, but the truth is that we have to do a deep analysis of why it didn't work and what are the reasons of that. But that was my actual question. I will give the floor to Herman Tex to see if that phenomenon is happening also in Europe. Well, I understand Javier, who is saying that we're stopping here, but in my opinion, and as a non-economist as well, and I've been keeping an eye on the policies, we saw the failure when we thought that the market and the freedom, the strategies will quote in Latin America, and we will be able to create a dynamism to avoid poverty, as it was the case in many countries. We didn't achieve that because there was a lack of decision. We didn't have the politicians working on that issue. And I see the governing people from central parties and what we call now the right wing or the central wing parties, and we've seen how they've been the access to these crazy regimes to these the worst of the governments possible. And we've seen how Macri, in your case, in the case of Argentina, but Piñera as well, through their willingness, the streets in Sao Paulo were demonstrating how Colombia is lighting a fire in Duque's government, and when Duque is interviewed by the media, an enemy of the policies in Colombia, he's just apologizing. We see some politicians' profile that are not able to be brave or to defend firmly as it is needed. And those are the perfect enemies for those groups that, for example, in Chile, they succeed to fire up all the streets to force a uncalled constitution, and they say it was the demand of the population. And now we have a 20% that chooses the governors, and obviously they're all coming from the left parties because those are the one voting. And that happened there. We have the success of Macri, and we're seeing the problems Duque is facing, and he's apologizing over and over again. And we'll leave this narrative in the European Union that we're debating here in a commission about Colombia, and the narrative of the left parties is the dominant, the governing the speech, but is the speech of the majority groups. But we're certain that this political society from the central right party is not living up to expectations, but the other one is creating the failure, the ruin. So from the EU, regardless of the theoretical speech and about the trade agreements that we're talking about, they will aim to benefit the life of the population, the agreements with Cuba. Are we feeding those regimes that are crushing those societies? What is your opinion?
Thank you, Carmen, Herman. Again, we are doing this very important meeting, this very important summit, these 3 days, very high level with a very esteemed guests. So many thanks again. This panel addresses the key issue of the EU trade agreements with Latin America and the Caribbean. And first of all, I would like to recall that trade policy is an exclusive competence of the European Union, which means that the EU manages trade policy and trade negotiations on behalf of the member states. The EU has signed association, free trade or political and cooperation agreements with 27 on the 33 countries in Latin America and in the Caribbean. The EU is the leading direct investor in the region, the main actor of international cooperation, and the third commercial partner for Latin America. In this regard, I would like to stress that we have recently, unfortunately, been surpassed by China. And in my opinion, this aspect should be analyzed with great attention. We have to aim to become the first partner again. Trade agreements are or should be a formidable tool, not only from an economic point of view, but also from a geopolitical one. They facilitate relationships, they facilitate exchanges between states, and enable the respective governments to extend their own foreign policy and international action. Trade as a role and must be understood as a diplomatic tool to help promote our interests, to actively defend democracies, and to put pressure through the targeted use of sanctions, for example, on the authoritarian regimes. EU agreements governing trade relations with Latin America and the Caribbean differ considerably in terms of scope, procedures, depending on when they were concluded in the past and the political context of the negotiations of the past. Unfortunately, the trade and political cooperation agreements signed by the EU have not always turned out to be the best instrument for promoting the prosperity of Latin American citizens. The most emblematic case is undoubtedly that of Cuba, where I believe we should be much more decisive in isolating the regime. But we must also pay close attention to Central America, where there are many dark relations with criminality, drug trafficking, as well as to the Andean area, Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador, where we have great potential, but all the three are at the center of very strong social and political clashes. Should basic democratic guarantees fail, and should the governments involved use these agreements to strengthen and maintain their power, then the EU must not hesitate to intervene decisively and, in the most serious cases, freeze those agreements. The European Parliament has a duty to supervise, and we, the ECR members, are ready to do our part in this respect. This is fundamental. We can't accept this kind of way that autonomously go ahead with this kind of mainstream narrative. We have to be more effective in enforcing that this kind of agreements can ensure more democracy and more security for these peoples.
We can't doubt that we have to adopt those measures, but taking stock is very risky. Javier is in Buenos Aires, and talking about the trade agreements with EU and Mercosur. This is a trade that is very weak, but Mercosur was one of the only blocs that was suspended to Venezuela due to not complying with the democracy charter. Javier, what do you think about this pressure on the developed economies when they have to impose those trade agreements, those guarantees, those conditionalities? Do you think they exist? And also, another question, the image of the free trade agreement in general terms in Latin America is not good. It's normally looked reluctantly and always creates protests and march, like in the government Kirchner. I assume it against the government. Why that image exists in Latin America, especially in Argentina? Can you respond to those questions? Well, it is true. The issue is this following. Regarding what Carlos is mentioning is really good regarding the intentions, but in real life it doesn't really work that way. Not because of the failure of Cuba, but Mercosur is a common market that never was, and it was just on paper, and it was just stuck in the tariff market. Argentina doesn't condemn Venezuela. They have a government that is complice with Venezuela, doesn't condemn Guatemala, neither the Cuban regime. So truth is that, as an example, we have the successful case of Chile regarding trade, where their openness was totally bilateral. So if we want to do something to create trade, then we have to eliminate the state and leave the trade to flow liberally. And if the state is implied, we have deviations of the market and decreasing of the value of the money, and they end up signing agreements with other bad people, and that control competency that will be detrimental to population. And that's why population are so against trade agreements. And on the other side, there's something very important as well, what Herman mentioned, and it's crucial when he said that the other opinion of the political view I was mentioning about their tools, and he said that in Latin America, truth is that they consecrate the success of granted. He said that we have to be involved in education, in media, and basically in the culture as well. And from there we can start the cultural fight. In the Sao Paulo Forum, they started with this 30 years ago, and it's been polluted by socialism. An interesting thing is that when we keep reading and reading and we go to the last bit of the speech, we go to the economic theory, and it's the subjective value that has been successful and the concept that the socialists are defending, and that theory was refuted, was challenged. And when we wonder why socialists keep embracing this, then we go to a deeper scale, and it's the values. And what socialism does is to promote jealousy and envy, and even assassination if it is needed. So in reality, we have to comprehend that what we have to do is to fight culture, not just about the superiority of the freedom ideas as a general concept, but also their productivity and their moral level, which is the core of the speech when the socialists speak about the inequalities. And we have to say it out loud, no being fearful, because otherwise, let's see what's happening in New York and the Cuba.
Vamos a hablar, tú has puesto sobre la mesa un tema que es muy importante y que tiene que ver también con...
You have mentioned a very important topic here, which is the treaties, the free trade agreements, that they open doors. You mentioned also education and referred to the Sao Paulo group, but you forgot the Pueblas group, which is a much more modern version. Alberto Fernández was president of Grupo Sao Paulo. Let's present other guests and let's get in depth into this issue. Everyone is connected, I'm being said, so let's introduce our panelists. Very welcome, everyone. Luis Espinosa Godel from Ecuador. Ecuador, it's a very new case. Maybe this is a very nice surprise we have, because we thought that we were going to find once again the new wave we were talking about. Is the image correct? Because I just cannot see it. I want to remind you of the fact that you can actually follow us through Facebook. We are streaming in our channel, #ECR Group, EuroLat Group. Welcome and congratulations. You are a professor in the San Francisco University in Quito. And we could say that the future exists. We thought we might not see a very hopeful future with the current president. Gabriel Calzada is also there, Chancellor of the Universidad Francisco Martín. We also have a promising politician here. Welcome. Maria Fernanda Cabal is also here. From the Democratic Center in Colombia, we were mentioning before the situation there. There are many factors in that country. And what is happening with this current crisis? And are they actually apologizing for the kind of fiscal reform they are trying to go through, this is because they are defending the state, a violent state. Exactly. This is what I was trying to summarize. That country and that government is what you're going to talk to us about. And that was a trigger, this fiscal reform. And we see the same situation happening in Chile with Sebastián Piñera. That was the cause of the prices of the public transport that went up. That was the very first situation that we had in the Andean region, and that was the very first trigger that affected the rest. And we are talking about these progressive governments or Peronist governments. All the other guests will have their say around this topic. Iván Espinosa Los Monteros, member of the Congress from Spain, representative of Vox. And he can also tell us what can we do in Europe and from Spain and in all these countries, all these Latin American countries, because Spain belongs together with them. What can we do to reduce this wave that seems to be resuscitating from the ashes of the communist dinosaur? We should consider that analyzing this topic means going back to a lesson in paleontology. Go ahead. Okay, so my turn. Go on. Thank you very much to everyone that has allowed for this summit. We hold great hopes for this productive and fruitful summit. And we will be able to actually confront all these threats that are menacing under the Cuban and communist umbrella with the Sao Paulo group and others. The Castros have been condemning to misery their peoples for 62 years. They have been financing and promoting the destabilization of democratic systems. And the external international influence of Cuba is higher than we might think. We know that very well in Spain because 50 years ago we suffered with the terrorist group ETA. And that influence is devastating. Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and other movements in Colombia that are destabilizing the government. It is a matter of human rights, and it is a matter of defending our democracies. We need to listen the demands of the Cuban peoples and not the regime. There has been an improvement of the situation of Cuban peoples, and there have been reiterated agreements. We need to demand the compliance with the political rights and the respect for human rights. We cannot leave civil society aside in our relationship with Cuba. We need to offer the utmost respect for the Cuban peoples. We cannot accept that money from the European citizenry finances this regime. We need to stop the force from Sao Paulo and the Grupo de Puebla in order to clear up the situation in Cuba. You from Colombia, you have lived this crisis situation in Colombia the latest weeks. Do you think the approach is wrong when tackling the crisis? Would you agree with the fact that there is a multifactorial cause to this crisis, to the root cause of all these revolts. Back to 2019, Duque's government was already cornered. Why? Because they need to go through a coup. They need to replace institutionality. But the only thing they do is using all that capacity of revolutionary investment. This is a coup d'etat, and this government is a purge. What happened with the COVID? This was an excuse that was used. The fiscal reform was just an excuse to move and trigger the revolution. Through a great campaign, a smear campaign in the media, they allowed people to believe that this was going to be terrible. But in fact, 3 million of people in poverty was the result. The middle class is weakened, and all this anger and social unrest was capitalized with an investment through a strategic investment controlled by foreigners. There are accounts from Russia and Bangladesh, and it has been financed by Venezuela, and we have evidence of this income of money that went through Colombia. However, unemployment, it is just a strategy where the narco-traffic is involved, and the external powers they're being controlled that too. So that's the way in which money comes and weapons come. There's no arbitrarity here. Everything is well thought out. These amounts of money are unthinkable. And Cuba is behind this. So I just cannot grasp. It's beyond my comprehension why our government has not blocked at once the relationship with Cuba. I do not understand why Spanish government and Europe in general do have relationships with Cuba that generates hatred and murder. And finally, they have been banned from exporting doctors as if they were trafficking people. You were talking to us about the financing of these movements that is just bringing the place upside down, and they are not respecting the trade agreements. Do you see a way of, for big economies and the European Union and specifically, do they have the strength to unveil all that's happening? There are many funds from the European Union that are moving, that are investing there. No one knows anything. Which would be your analysis here? Hi, Kathy, thank you. The way your colleague was telling about the benefits of capitalism, I think that this has been well thought out and studied lately. Even the evolutionist psychology has already gone through this. If there is free trade, there is politeness. What you are telling me now, both agreements clear up this thing. From 2008 to 2019, they had the very same GDP of the countries from this socialist, from the 21st century. In the schools, nobody says anything, and nothing affects more the quality of life of citizenry like living in a society where you can literate. This is one of the countries that it's more regulated educative systems and less open. A minority of anti-globalization people and the followers of of governments that kill freedom. For Sao Paulo and other movements, totalitarian and statist movements, they used this regulation to infiltrate themselves and control. What happens with the university rankings? They are just designed to favor the institutions that are less akin to the market principles. The research projects are penalized. The projects are dismissed. In this framework, no one should be surprised that many subjects that would help develop a critical analysis are questioned by these very agencies that give accreditations. Only a very small amount of universities are not participating in this system. Chile, Peru, Argentina, they have fallen prey for statism, and this should not surprise anyone. What could we expect? But there are some exceptions to this rule. There is a very important exception where we see stability and a decent degree of freedom. And I'm going to finish with this. The university degrees homologation is so very slow. Why cannot we equiparate both? Why is it so difficult to make degrees that are worth it and valid all across America or even all across the world? This is the Inquisition of the 21st century. This Inquisition works with the politically correct seal. We do not and should not impose the tradition, the liberal tradition. We should just allow freedom of university institutions, students and graduates. We should deregulate the degrees and the acknowledgement of the degrees. We would have a better education, more quality, a better, more respectful society, and rule of law, private property and freedom. I think that this kind of concept of education could help the strategy of these governments who are trying to transform the continent and going backwards to the 70s. They just want to create universities where there are militants. We see this in Bolivia, Argentina, Ecuador, Brazil. It's not the same. A degree from La Plata University in Argentina than any other university. So it's very difficult to make them equal. Because if you have a company and you are an employer, you're going to respect some degrees and others not that much. So, the Vice Minister talked about in the Dominican Republic the fact that education is a passport for the future. There are funds from the European Union, but do you think there is an ideology or there is a decent criteria? Well, if we're talking about being politically correct, maybe we should actually be clearer and foster transparency. Our universities should give and provide the best tools to our students. And both at a public, at a state, and a private level. We understand that if what we're doing does not work, we necessarily must change course, because otherwise we will be isolated. That's how we feel. We would like to continue this conversation with Gabriel in order to transform actually the university education. What about funds? Back in 1965, there was a very bloody civil war in the Dominican Republic. After this civil war, the government wanted to create employment. And so was focused on helping out the productive industries to be creative to achieve that goal. But there were fractions of Marxists and Leninists and wanted to destroy that policy. Our neighbors wanted to find out and create an agreement, but those neighbors were leaning towards the left as well. What happened in this country so far? Freedom can be extinguished anytime, within just one generation. This freedom was not in Peru before this. Why am I giving these examples? Because the funds we receive from the European Union, I cannot say that we are playing with the double narrative. But sometimes we can say that the American court and the majority of peoples, and in Nicaragua, we wanted to control elections because we don't want any vote to be lost through dictatorship. For example, Castro. Castro is communist. I can say publicly all this, and before holding the position I have, I had already underlined the misery and decay experienced in Latin America. Herman was very clear with this. We should not be the little right, the coward little right. One thing is having a plural narrative, and a very different one is go backwards in your positions. In order to win this ideological battle, we need to keep up with those positions, because otherwise we're not going to last in any government, and we're going to end up with what we already know. I'd like to say that I want to invite you here to Santo Domingo, a beautiful city, where maybe we can celebrate the next summit in order to continue to fight for freedom. Thank you very much. I really support and see with very good eyes these initiatives, because it is a fair struggle, and it was an urgency, because they have declared war to our allies, and we cannot remain quiet in front of all of this. What happened yesterday in the OEA? Every country in Latin America were expressing these very moderate opinions. Let's talk with Germán and Carlo. Do you agree with all these topics that have been discussed so far? Let's be very specific. Which are the keys for the European Union and its intervention? Thank you very much, Roman. I really, really appreciate your words. And it's very good to speak loud and clear, because euphemisms actually are just meant to cover and hide. So, in my opinion, we need to be very clear that the European Union is not playing the correct role in this situation. On the contrary, it's favoring very negative tendencies and trends. And sometimes it's just outrageous, some of the positions that are taken. I just very much support this vote rejecting this dictatorship of Ortega. And what's happening in Nicaragua is just unacceptable. And it's very much related with Cuba, the protection this country is getting, and the attitude of the European Union. For example, with the comments and actions of Josep Borrell. They could not avoid this very harsh resolution condemning the facts. Because the European Union should actually go to the root and destroy the destructive structures in Cuba. What Ortega y Murillo has been doing is unacceptable, and we should have a different attitude with what happens in Venezuela. There are 36 people sanctioned. And Spain, for example, it is also violating some of these rules because they have connections that are quite frankly obscene when we talk about money bonds with Venezuela. Because in Spain we have a communist and socialist government, to be honest. Politics, these kind of policies are disastrous. Because they just do that to comply with this radical majority who fosters Marxism. What happens in Spain is very much alike what's happening in Latin America. We saw how Marxism, through Spain, achieved this bridgehead, and the current government is kind of stabilizing all that kind of mafia policies. All that money is for their friends. We're going to talk about these revolving doors. Could we go back to Ecuador, because that's a very relevant case? What would be your diagnosis and the prospect? And Venezuela is also harassing you, right? What's going to happen in Peru? And what's going to happen in the neighboring countries? You are right in between. And you were the first ones back in 2019 to suffer this. Exactly. It is a pleasure to be here talking about everything that's happening in Latin America. Colombia, Peru, Chile. Okay, that's sad, but there are hopeful symptoms as well. We have to break and stop correísmo. And we have seen that happening in 2021. Why do we see these processes of accelerating communism nowadays? It's education, basically. It's a terrible problem because we do not talk about economy. Free trade favors both parties and improves welfare. But the 90% of economists in the North American Economists Association do agree with this, and the other 13%, we know that there's everything, there's a great variety in the economy industry, but it's important to see and to foster free trade as an objective, as a goal in itself. Because Ecuador signed the trade agreement with the European Union, and we saw the good results. The Ecuadorian citizenry can now buy European products at a better price. Free trade allows not only commodities to travel, but also people and ideas. Of course, Chile is a dramatic example because the voting has been interesting. But we saw that the new constitution was not the solution. Alongside with commodities, ideas are also traded. The Paris Agreement, the Agenda 2030, freedom, press, human rights, all these ideas are traveling as well when we sign a trade agreement. There is a public that is young and diverse, and they are giving me hope. Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and Chile, they are united in this alliance. But why? Because they are keeping an eye on Asia. And Asia is doing what they should do. Because which is the essence of the European Union? It was born as a union of countries to foster and defend democracy and human rights and trade, but it seems that now Europe has forgotten its very roots. It's actually doing the opposite as what identifies it. Something is wrong in content and in form. Nobody's telling you anything. Things are not explained. The experts and the specialists really do know what is good for the countries. But the citizenry in general, the public, they do not understand. It feels like Greek to them. So how can we just talk about China in the continent?
The great argument, the great issue, the great question. I fully agree with the professor, and in general with all the interventions. Very interesting. But I think that when we come back to the question, what should EU do to avoid these situations, I think, and I have always been persuaded that it is not necessary to make trade agreements with everyone at any price, solely driven by economic criteria. For example, we could think for 1 minute about the agreements that we have here from the EU with the African countries. We spend a lot of money every year in cooperation projects and so on. For example, in our view, all this money has to be conditioned. Here we speak a lot about conditionalities, rule of law, and so on. We would like to condition this money in a clear and sincere effort, for example, to stop illegal migration towards Europe shores, towards Italy or Spain. We represent the two countries, the main exposed to these phenomenons. So, for example, this is an example, how to say, that we can condition our financing, our giving money to different countries. So I believe it is much better to use all our commercial strength to pursue a more incisive political agenda, away from the ideological claims of the left, to which the ideological environmentalism of the Greens that we have now is now being added here in Europe and all around the world. The European conservatives are called also in this field to bring EU back to the path of realism and pragmatism. In Latin America, there is an inestimable wealth of natural resources. Just think of the Amazon and the immense water supply. There are resources such as oil that are used as a political weapon, for example, in Maduro's Venezuela. Europe has a growing demand for raw materials, and in this field there is certainly an area of great common interest. We have to foster a fair trade, just, ecologically conscious, but at the same time able to combine the interests of companies. In particular, we have to choose carefully where to invest our money, which sectors to focus on, and with which partners. In my opinion, the best way to prevent public resources from falling into the hands of extreme left-wing governments, movements, and so on, and to reduce the risk of the EU trade policy being biased by ideological motives, is to invest in the positive role of the entrepreneur. We must promote private initiative, free from conditioning of politics and state subsidies. For example, I would strengthen the educational exchange programs provided by the EU. We spoke about education, especially for the young entrepreneurs, and I agreed to use the network of the expats associations of the European origin, which often represent true excellence and a valuable source of information and context. So we can do many things, but the main problem is having clear the priorities, the political agenda that we want to follow in those countries, and this is not clear at the moment. So first of all, having clear the agenda, and then use the instruments, the tools that we have.
That clear agenda that you're talking about, Ivan Espinosa, how do you analyze it now that you know the assignation of the funds? Do you think that that assignation is equitable? And what is the reproach that Spain has to do to the EU? And as a breach of Latin America and Europe? Well, it's not just a reproach from Spain to the EU, and I think we all agree it's a reproach towards everyone defending contrary ideas. But whoever we defend private ownership, we all agree that if we leave the education on the leftist parties, now we see the generation of young students and young people that have been educated in the wrong ideas, and now it's impossible to give a turn to this agenda. Those European funds has been already conditionalized for those ideas that was created through a great consensus. And now we see that this is conditionalized by feminism, by gender policy, by decarbonization, and an attack to tradition concepts, something that is not related to our state. All those ideas that are against our political ideas. And when we ourselves, as the EU, we believe on those ideas, it is very difficult to reach trade agreements with Latin American countries. So we can use those trade agreements to convey better ideas. So I am a great believer that we have to have an inner fight, and whenever we travel abroad and we have those trade agreements with Latin America, and when we want to give a helping hand to our colleagues in the Latin American countries, now we have to do it. Gabriel, what are the deadlines that we will have to set to have that process on the right path to approve and adapt the universities so population can understand free trade and multilateral agreements? Well, that is an issue that depends on what has been understood as legitimate. And in this case, we cannot just approve a regulation. We need an idea to be understood by population. That's why before we were mentioning what Ivan, if throughout the years we've been teaching that trade has just negative impacts and the free economic and the freedom of economy will create rich and poor, then these trade agreements between EU and Latin America will include liberty ideas and the defense of private ownership. So we have to work in all the cases, all the aspects, and we have to do as much as possible to free the academic world of these regulations where it is limited now. But also we have to work on the political aspect and on the company aspect, and to stop all this interventionism, all this mercantilization that is created by the tax regulations, this game of I will grant freedom just if you follow my ideas or my interests. If we stop that, then we will see the economic freedom of Latin America will break free, and not just in Latin America but in Europe too, and we will open more spaces. But we can do it rather quite quickly if we work on all the aspects at the same time. Quickly, when you say quickly, what do you mean quickly? Because times don't run the same way in Europe or in Ecuador, in Argentina. Other question, political elites that we've been talking about before, and do we have to ask, do we need to hold accountable the political elite that allows all those kind of things? Luis, do you agree with this statement? Well, it's a good question. The most of the company elite and entrepreneurials is the colleagues companies. So they create a company through a friend. The European funds promote this because they promoting projects not from the market to benefit the population, but those projects that will benefit politicians and will receive those funds. So that creates that the political elite is just morality, is not focused on the interests of both parties, but just one. They're not benefiting, they're not helping the population, but through grants they're controlling the majority of the market. And at the end we have a civil party, a company parties that are subject to the political parties and powers. We have to have a civil society and an entrepreneurial society independent, and with the European funds they're creating this power, and we're creating this capitalism by friend. And this is one of the biggest problems that we have both in Europe and Latin America. I do agree. What do you say, Herman? I totally concur. He said it so clearly. When we see the great companies in Spain that are all looking towards the government, what will they receive from the government? This is just a joke, and to see what they can get from the pandemic funds. And that's why no one is saying anything wrong about the politicians, and they're just holding their hands to see what they receive. It's horrible. A president as Mr. Sanchez never said a truth since we know him. And now we have the great companies, IBEX, the whole IBEX, yes. I remember still the big fights that the industrial had towards German chancellors. With Merkel, the thing that started to change a little bit. But when the Industrial Federation in Germany was raising their voices and said, no, this is not the truth to the government, it was as powerful as when a real independent union that defends their workers, because they're paying a membership, not just because they're receiving funds from the power. When those unions had a social dialogue that could be called as such, they're just part of these muppets from the government, because it's not capitalism, it's other thing. Mrs. Cabal, can we apply this to Colombia too? But although Colombia has a added value, I think she's not here. There's some technical issues. Yes, she was in the car, so, well, Colombia's case is quite specific, so we will give the floor to Dominican Republic now then, and we will see those good relationships and where's the path to follow. And in this sense, what happens with the entrepreneurs in Dominican Republic? I believe it's a very small elite, but it's very powerful. Is it true? Can we live up to this? How do we balance the Dominican Republic? Well, I must say that the businessman elite here is very small and very powerful, and our neighbors as countries in Central America and the Caribbean don't share the same ideas as we do, and they have other policies. But one of the greatest problems in the Dominican Republic is, as happens in other countries, is as follows. The fact that we had a market that could be deemed as self-sufficient for our own consumption without thinking about the broad competition. And many countries that didn't have this kind of markets, for a simple reason, for survival, they contributed to the competences and they're now deep in misery. I remember some of the trade agreements that we had and weren't used correctly, and they could give a better even growth, but in my country we had the better growth index in the last years, and up until 2003 it didn't mean that we will diversify our economy. So tourism is still the greatest sector in our GDP. Is an 8%. It's not the 60% as is the case of other islands in the Caribbean, but it's something that we cannot contribute on a long term. We have to contribute with exports or any other abroad, other foreign exports. But I would like to highlight this very clearly. We normally think that the enemies of the free trade is those of the left. They're very vocal, but it's not true. As Herman said, those enemies are not doing it publicly through press media, but they're the enemies within the parliaments, and they're blocking the free trade because they want to use mercantilism. And that is very disruptive to everyone. Because once again, if we have a small political party, communist party, fighting for free trade, it's not as harmful as big interest and big companies with long arms that will be the Muppets of the public policies. We have to know who are we facing, and very briefly I would say that I am fearful to see some countries that were having good growth rates because of the political cadency. And because of the open door policies, they opened the door to extremisms. And that should be a call of attention for everyone, because that could not happen in any country. And we have to see that there's no happy ending, there's no fairy tales in the fight for freedom. Again, the price of freedom is the eternal monitoring of the freedom. That's true, it's not a fairy tale, this is a terror film. We will close this session with the final remarks of all the panelists. Ivan Spinoza, can you tell us your final remarks as Mr. Minister was mentioning? Well, I would like to thank every one of the panelists. I think all the presentations were really good, but talking about these connected vessels, I go back to what I mentioned before, Cuba. The presence of the Cuba regime or the tentacles of the Cuban regime are very harmful. And I will finish talking to the Cuban people. And they show us their dignity day in, day out. And they even suffer and lost their lives. So we have to acknowledge their bravery. Amaya Neato, Michel Díaz, Amaya Maro, Alberto Ronald, Señor García, all those prisoners, and I want to tell them that we are with you, and all those independent journalists that we listen to, but they're very oppressed by the regime. And lastly, greetings to everyone, and greetings to Harold Hepero. We don't forget you, not your relatives, and we will find the way to clarify your crimes, the crimes of those that died fighting for freedom. And if in Europe we saw once a wall to be full, the wall of the Cuban communism will fall again, and that will happen before we expect. And whenever Cuba falls and the Cuban regime falls, we will be closer to find more freedom for the Latin American countries, and that will provide a better future for the population. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gabriel. Your last remark of all these presentation and interventions throughout this session. Very briefly, Carmen, the free trade agreements have showed that enhance the life of the population, and European Union should stop the conditionalities of the free trade agreements that are implying more interventionism for Latin America. All the negotiations in Europe are demanding the inclusion of intervention measures from the European point of view, from antitrust laws to any other law. We have to stop that. We have to stop the hypocrisy of trade agreements. And what has to be is the real freedom of goods, of commodities, of people in Latin America and Europe. Luis, interventionism, protectionism, is that a business at the end of the day? Your last remarks, please. Well, truth is a pleasure to be here, and I will convey the next message. It's true that Europe wants to promote their interventionism agenda, and it's true there's some socialist political governments, but I do believe that we have good power. Trade agreements will benefit everyone, so I do believe that we have really good examples in Latin America of how we can be prospective, and I do believe that if the EU will remember the values, the principles of what was created, not of the situation nowadays, of what made them to be what they become today, freedom and prosperity will resume for all of us. Mr. Minister, your last remarks, please. Surely, in 40 seconds, I would like to say that I've been listening for a few days, for a few times, and I would like to say that the power without vision is sterile. It doesn't go to anywhere, and the vision without power is useless. We have to know all the conservative and liberal aspects and to have a real assessment and to reach to the decision-making spaces. We see what's happening in Europe. We see what's happening in this region, but we're trying to stop the most extremisms, but we cannot leave aside the insects. The civil society spaces are crucial as well, and it is important as well, crucial, fundamental, to be present in the decision-making spaces, because we cannot just give up that space to extremisms or Rio Hayek as the socialist of every party. Well, now Carlos Iraza will give us his last remarks. And I don't know, do you want to be promoting Europe or?
Just to thank you for your kind moderation and to thank all our fantastic guests, because I have to say that for me it was a very useful lesson of Spanish, first of all, because without earphones I could understand, I think, everything, or more or less, but a very good lesson of politics, because we here need, I speak for myself, because Herman is a master in this and is more expertise in these matters, but it was very useful for us to have new and more conscious tools that we can use for our politics here, for our political battle here, because we have to strengthen the knowledge of all the facts, the truth that is not spoken about. We don't hear the truth here in the European institutions. So the first thing is to help us to say the truth here, use our few minutes of our speeches in the plenary or in the committees to say the truth in front of our public opinion that can be recorded and can hear us, hear our interventions, first of all, and second, have concrete instruments to try to change the things, to support this continent, to support these peoples that deserve freedom, liberty, security, and the future of hope. And we are fully committed on this. And thank you again to Herman Tertsch, that is the leader of this ECR Eurolat group, and that is a priority for our political family here in Brussels.
He's the leader, he's the promoter, he has a brain that doesn't stop, and he's working in Europe and Latin America. So please, Herman, give us your final remarks. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Carlo. And thank you, everyone, because this has been an extremely interesting session. And I'm very proud, because after these 1.5 hours of debate, some of us, we didn't know each other, although we knew of the personalities, but no one said things here just to be nice. We said what we thought, and what we thought it was necessary to be told. And that is the fundamental speech that we have. What we were mentioning before, that Roman was mentioning about the euphemism. There has been no euphemism. We've been talking about what we have to do, the challenges, the big problems that we have. But in general terms, thank you everyone, and please remind all the prisoners in Nicaragua during the last two weeks, 9 opponents, 5 women running for the elections. We don't know the number of disappeared people, but obviously as well Cuba, as Mr. Espinosa was mentioning, that whole of evilness, that spotlight of misery, of hate, of resentment, of arms, of coordination of drug trafficking, of everything that Cuba has. If that continues in Cuba, Cuba will not have freedom, and no freedom will be available in Latin America. Also, thanks to all these Cubans that voted for the progressive parties, and nowadays they're suffering poverty in all the continent and Europe, in worldwide. So to all of them, greetings, resistance, solidarity, and let's hope for the best and for the best solution to everyone. And meanwhile here, the commitment to keep fighting, culturally fighting. We started this summit. Tomorrow we have then the next day of this summit, but the cultural fight has started in Europe to create that alliance with Latin America, that alliance with all these synergies, with the cooperation that we have with the Forum of Sao Paulo, Grupo de Puebla, with us, with more coordination, with more contents, with more tools, with more training for youth, so they're able to access universities, education, communication as well, so we can be able to win, because we are right. Well, we're not here to please anyone, as Herman was mentioning, and we're not here to make enemies. If we make friends, that's great, but we're here to raise all the problems that we have, problems regarding freedom, what Europe can do for Latin America, and vice versa as well. And tomorrow we will have the 3rd day of this EuroLat Summit. This is the first summit to defend democracy, to combat authoritarian regimes. We haven't defined totalitarianism, but we will touch upon that tomorrow. But when we talk about dictatorship, is drug trafficking. Drug trafficking is the biggest, the greatest foe of Europe and Latin America. Tomorrow we'll be talking about this tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone.